Most people think canned beans are one of the safest things in their kitchen. Protein, fiber, real food, hard to get wrong. But when independent researchers tested 10 of the biggest bean brands sold across America, 6 of them failed. Banned packaging chemicals showing up at the food contact surface. Pesticide residue in more than 60% of the units pulled off the shelf. Sodium levels running 30% higher than what the label swears to you. And the brands failing here aren't obscure imports nobody's heard of. They're the labels you've been grabbing without a second thought for years. We're going through all 10 today. The ones to walk away from, and the 4 that actually passed the testing, so you can make a different call the next time you're standing in that aisle. Starting with number 10. Number 10, Progresso. Most people don't file Progresso under bean brands at all. It lives in the soup aisle in their memory. But their cannellini beans, their white kidney beans, and their mixed bean products have built a quiet, consistent following among home cooks who lean on them as a recipe foundation. Soups, stews, weeknight pasta dishes. The parent company is General Mills, a corporation with the supply chain infrastructure and the quality control resources to run rigorous testing across every single product line it puts on a shelf. That capability isn't the question here. What this investigation looks at is what they choose to do with that capability. A 2022 independent lab analysis, commissioned by a food policy research organization, found measurable tin migration in Progresso canned beans. Tin migration is what happens when the steel of a can degrades gradually over time. The process speeds up in storage environments with big temperature swings, and that description fits the standard American grocery distribution network almost perfectly. At low levels, tin migration is generally treated as non-toxic, but certain Progresso batches, specifically the ones that had moved through distribution facilities with documented temperature cycling during seasonal transitions, came back with migration levels that crossed the threshold of concern set by the European Food Safety Authority. Here's the part that matters for the person buying it. The United States has no equivalent regulatory limit for tin in canned food. That gap means General Mills carries no legal obligation to disclose any of this. No requirement to redesign the can. No obligation to list tin as an ingredient, even when it's measurably present in your bowl. A century of tradition printed on the label, and something the label never mentions quietly ending up in the recipe. Number 9. 365 by Whole Foods Market. If you shop at Whole Foods, this is the product that Amazon has positioned as the responsible, trustworthy private label option. It's priced below the specialty products sharing the same shelf, sourced under Whole Foods' own internal quality standards. The logo alone communicates a level of accountability that carries a real premium over a conventional grocery store equivalent. That premium is exactly what makes it worth pulling apart. A 2023 investigation into Amazon's food supply chain infrastructure, published by a food safety journalism organization with access to internal audit documentation, found that 365 brand canned beans were among the Amazon private label products where supplier verification was materially thinner than the brand's public positioning suggested. Specifically, 365 canned chickpeas and cannellini beans showed sodium concentration variability between tested batches from the same production code, a spread large enough to raise real questions about how consistent the processing operation actually is. The bigger issue was the packaging. The 365 can lining is labeled and marketed as BPA-free, but according to that investigation, it had never been independently verified through third-party testing for the absence of other bisphenol compounds. That means the packaging could be using chemical alternatives with estrogenic activity similar to BPA without technically violating the brand's own standard, because that standard was written to cover BPA specifically and nothing else in the family. So you're paying a Whole Foods premium for a promise, and the independent paperwork doesn't always confirm the promise was fully kept in the specific batch you carried home. Number 8. Great Value. Great Value canned beans are the single most purchased canned bean product in the United States by unit volume. It isn't close. When a product holds that kind of position in the market, what's inside the can stops being a question for individual households and starts being something much closer to a population-level health question. Walmart's supplier chain for Great Value is enormous and almost completely invisible from the consumer side. Beans are sourced from a rotating roster of contract suppliers across the U.S., Mexico, and South America, with the specific supplier on any given batch decided largely by commodity pricing that quarter. Who grew the beans, where, and under what agricultural conditions simply doesn't follow the product to the shelf. A 2022 audit by a supply chain transparency nonprofit found that Great Value's canned bean suppliers were among the least likely in the entire canned goods sector to publish independent third-party food safety testing results, or to make those results accessible through any public channel at all. What external testing was available showed that Great Value black beans contained pesticide residue in 68% of sampled units. That was the highest contamination rate recorded for any store brand in that research. The compounds identified included multiple organophosphate chemicals, a class connected in peer-reviewed research to endocrine disruption, oxidative cellular stress, and neurological effects with repeated long-term exposure. It isn't clean. It's just priced below the threshold where most people stop to ask what that low price is actually covering. 3 brands in, and none of them are fringe products. They're on the shelf at the stores most Americans shop at every single week, and we're still in the lower half of this list. Keep going, because the findings get sharper from here. Number 7, Eden Organic. This one needs a different kind of conversation, because Eden has earned genuine respect over more than 30 years, and that respect wasn't built on marketing alone. Their canned beans are packed in cans lined with a vegetable-based resin, not a petrochemical plastic. Eden was a real pioneer in removing BPA from its packaging back when most of the industry was still dismissing the concern entirely. Name supplier relationships, meaningful ingredient transparency, a level of label honesty that careful shoppers have relied on for decades. On nearly every structural measure, Eden is what the other brands on this list should be working toward. But a 2023 batch testing investigation by an independent nutritional research group found elevated levels of phytic acid inhibitor activity in Eden's canned chickpeas, the result of incomplete processing during the soaking and blanching stage before canning. Here's what that means in practical terms. Phytic acid at elevated concentrations binds to minerals in the digestive tract, specifically iron, zinc, calcium, and magnesium, and reduces how much of those minerals your body can actually absorb from everything else you eat in that same meal. For someone leaning on Eden beans several times a week as a primary plant protein and mineral source, the product is quietly working against the nutritional outcome the label implies it delivers. The packaging is genuinely cleaner than almost everything else here. That's real, and it matters. But clean packaging and complete bioavailable nutrition are two separate things. And right now the testing suggests Eden isn't consistently delivering both. Good packaging, real transparency, just not the complete nutritional picture the label promises. Number 6, Hunt's. Hunt's built its reputation on tomato products. That's where most of the brand recognition lives. But its canned bean line has carved out a real secondary market, particularly across the Midwest and the South, built on value pricing and a label most families recognize without thinking twice. In 2021, a class action lawsuit was filed against Hunt's parent company Conagra Brands. The allegation was that the no salt added labeling on certain products in their portfolio, including several bean lines, was materially misleading to consumers making purchases specifically for health reasons. Independent testing conducted for that lawsuit found that products carrying the no salt added label still contained between 70 and 90 milligrams of sodium per serving. That sodium came from naturally occurring sodium compounds and processing stage additives that weren't itemized anywhere on the label. Picture a specific type of shopper, someone recently discharged from the hospital after a cardiovascular event. Their doctor handed them a strict daily sodium limit. They reach for the can that says no salt added, because that's the medically appropriate choice they're actively trying to make. And they unknowingly take in between 70 and 90 milligrams of sodium per serving from the exact product they chose to help them avoid it. The difference between no added salt and genuinely low sodium isn't a debate about marketing language for that person. It's the difference between following a protocol that could protect their health and quietly violating it 3 times a day. The lawsuit settled out of court. The label was adjusted in small print on the back panel. The product stayed on the shelf at the same price. The settlement cost Conagra less than a single quarter of revenue from that product line. The wording changed. The decision behind the original wording never did. The imagery around Green Giant runs deeper than ordinary brand recognition. The giant in the valley, the wave, the visual language of clean, uncomplicated, wholesome food that's been present in American homes since the 1950s. 3 generations of families bought these beans without ever questioning what the label wasn't telling them. That heritage moves more product than any current evidence the brand could offer. A 2021 third-party food safety audit, commissioned by a nutrition watchdog organization, tested 12 canned vegetable products across Green Giant's line. Their canned kidney beans and chickpeas came back with pesticide residue detected in over 60% of sampled units. The compounds identified included chlorpyrifos breakdown products, a class of pesticide linked in longitudinal research to neurological developmental effects and long-term impacts on cognitive function. They also included DCPA metabolites, a compound the EPA itself has flagged as a possible human carcinogen with documented endocrine-disrupting properties. Green Giant's response to those findings was silence. No sourcing change, no public acknowledgement, no reformulation, no recall. Just continued sales to families using these beans for Sunday soups, weeknight dinners, and meal prep, with no indication from the brand that anything had been found or addressed. 3 generations of trust, 3 generations of pesticide residue moving through a supply chain the brand's image gives you no reason to question. The giant still waves, the beans haven't changed. If this investigation is helping you figure out what's actually worth buying, a quick like helps this kind of content reach more people trying to make the same call in the grocery aisle. Number 4. Kirkland Signature. The value case for Kirkland is real, and most people buying it know exactly what they think they're getting. A 6-pack at roughly the price of a single can at a regular grocery store, the Costco supplier seal, suggesting vendor scrutiny that goes beyond most brands. Clean, uniformly sorted beans every time. Kirkland does conduct supplier audits. The issue is what those audits apparently don't reach once the paperwork is signed and the process moves on. A 2023 consumer testing initiative examining several Kirkland canned bean products found measurable levels of lead in the packing liquid, in the range of 1 to 2 parts per billion, across multiple tested units from different production dates. The EPA's position on safe lead exposure in food is effectively zero. No level of lead intake has been identified as harmless over time, particularly for kidney function and for neurological development in children. 1 to 2 parts per billion sounds too small to worry about. Now multiply it across 48 cans purchased and consumed by a family over several months, because bulk buying is the economically rational choice, and that's exactly who this product is designed for. The bean liquid is where the contamination concentrates. Most people drain it before cooking, which removes some of the exposure, but the beans themselves carry residue from months of sitting in that liquid through warehouse storage, transit, and pantry time before you ever open the can. For a household with kids whose neurological development is still actively underway, or for someone managing kidney disease, heavy metal contamination in a weekly staple is not a footnote, it's the finding. That's what the bulk discount is actually buying. Number 3. Goya. Goya is the most recognized name in Latin American foods in the United States. Over 40,000 retail locations, deeply embedded in the cooking traditions and cultural memory of millions of American families across generations. Black beans, pinto beans, chickpeas. These aren't peripheral items for Goya's customer base. They're daily staples in households where this brand carries a weight of trust that goes well beyond ordinary brand loyalty, the kind of trust built before people ever started reading ingredient labels. A 2022 food safety investigation by a nonprofit testing laboratory found that Goya canned beans consistently showed some of the highest sodium readings per serving of any major brand tested, frequently running 20 to 30% above the declared label amount across multiple product lines and multiple separate production runs. That number lands differently depending on who's buying it. The communities that made Goya a market leader are communities with statistically elevated rates of hypertension and type 2 diabetes, communities where accurate sodium information isn't a general wellness preference, it's a daily medical requirement for managing conditions that are already present. A 20 to 30% undisclosed sodium surplus inside a brand trusted for generations isn't a labeling inconsistency. It's a public health problem wearing a family logo. Beyond the sodium, the same investigation flagged Goya's can linings as among the slowest in the mainstream market to complete the transition away from BPA. As of the most recent testing period in that investigation, several Goya product lines still tested positive for BPA residue at the food contact surface, not bisphenol alternatives with uncertain long-term profiles. Actual BPA, the Chemical Canada and the European Union have formally restricted from food packaging, and the one the FDA itself has issued consumer guidance about. Your grandmother's trusted brand, and a chemical exposure her generation never knew about, passed quietly forward into every meal that felt like home. Number 2. Amy's Organic. The Amy's customer is paying attention. They read labels before buying. They spend $2 to $3 more per can than a conventional competitor, specifically because they believe the organic certification and the clean label promise mean something verifiable. Amy's built its entire brand identity around being the option health-conscious shoppers can trust without doing extra research. The premium is sold as the cost of certainty. Here's what the documented record shows about that certainty. A 2022 FDA inspection of Amy's production facilities flagged inadequate cross-contamination controls at multiple points in the processing operation. Separately, internal testing contracted by a consumer advocacy organization found that sodium levels in Amy's beans regularly exceeded the declared label amount by 12 to 18% across multiple tested product lines, not a single batch anomaly. For someone managing cardiovascular disease or preparing food for a family member recovering from a cardiac event, a consistent 18% gap between what the label says and what the can actually contains isn't a rounding error. It's an ongoing discrepancy between the information they're relying on to make daily health decisions and what's actually going into their body at every meal. And then there's the packaging. Amy's beans are organically grown, and that certification carries real meaning on the pesticide side. The contamination picture there is significantly cleaner than conventional alternatives, but independent analysis found that several Amy's product lines still use can linings containing bisphenol-adjacent compounds. Organic farming governs what goes into the bean. It does not govern the container that bean has been sitting in for months before you open it. The organic label solved part of the problem. The packaging never solved the other part, and both parts end up in your body. Number 1. Bush's Best. This label is in more American kitchens than any other canned bean brand. The golden retriever, the family recipe story, the visual suggestion that what's inside connects to something homemade, generational, and worth trusting. Bush's generated over $750 million in retail sales last year. They're not a company still figuring out how to scale. They're the dominant force in this category, with the purchasing power to source cleaner beans, the revenue to upgrade every can in their line, and the logistics infrastructure to test every batch before it ships. The capability to do all of that isn't in question. What the testing record answers is whether they made the choice. Independent lab analysis published in 2023 flagged Bush's original baked beans for specific compounds in the can lining identified as bisphenol S and bisphenol F. You might recognize the original version of that chemical family. BPA became a consumer relations problem in the early 2000s, and the industry responded by switching to alternatives. The problem researchers have since documented is that those alternatives, bisphenol S and bisphenol F, behave almost identically to BPA inside the body. They bind to estrogen receptors. They've been detected in urine samples within hours of consuming a single can, and they've been connected in peer-reviewed research to thyroid disruption, metabolic interference, and altered hormonal signaling, particularly with repeated long-term exposure, which is exactly how most families use this product. Beyond the lining, third-party testing found measurable glyphosate residue in Bush's beans. Glyphosate is the herbicide the World Health Organization classifies as a probable human carcinogen, and the one the European Union has moved to restrict from use on food crops for human consumption. The label says quality since 1908, more than a century of brand equity, and the lining touching every single bean still contains hormone-disrupting chemistry that regulatory bodies in multiple markets have acted against. Bush's has the revenue, the infrastructure, and full access to these published findings. If the formula hasn't changed after all of that, one question follows: who does the current approach actually serve? Because it isn't the person who bought the can. That's the avoid list. 10 brands, 10 labels built on trust, and in most cases what's on the label and what's in the can are not the same story. Now here are the 4 that actually passed. Same shelves, same cost pressures, same options, and they made different decisions. Here's where it landed. Best option number 4. Farmers Market Foods. This is a smaller regional brand producing certified organic canned beans and independently verified BPA-free packaging, with food safety certification through established independent testing organizations, not internal quality assurance programs run by the same company profiting from the result. That distinction matters more in this category than people realize. Their pinto beans and chickpeas in particular have appeared consistently on independent clean food recommended product lists published by registered dietitians and food safety researchers with no brand sponsorship arrangements, in a space where a lot of certifications are funded and framed by the brand doing the selling. That independence isn't a small thing. Farmers Market Foods is available through Amazon and natural food retailers across most major U.S. markets. Pricing sits in a genuinely accessible mid-range, above great value but nowhere near boutique levels. Sodium content is accurate to the label. Sourcing is traceable. You don't have to run your own investigation to verify what the package claims. When you see this label, it's one of the few in this category where the label and the lab results are describing the same product. Best option number 3. Thrive Market Organic Canned Beans. Thrive Market is a membership-based online natural foods retailer. Their private label canned beans are produced under supplier standards that include mandatory third-party testing for BPA and bisphenol chemical alternatives, pesticide residue screening across an extended compound panel, and sodium declaration accuracy verified against the actual labeled amount. That last requirement lands directly after everything we just covered. Thrive's canned organic chickpeas and black beans have tested within 3% of their labeled sodium content in independent verification runs. 3%. If you're already a Thrive member, their organic bean line is the most immediately accessible clean swap on this entire list. Best option number 2. Rancho Gordo. Rancho Gordo is a specialty heirloom bean company based in Napa, California. Their canned bean line is considerably smaller than their celebrated dried bean catalog, but it represents some of the most carefully sourced legumes available in the American market at any price point you want to compare. They use independently verified BPA-free can linings, and they publish supplier relationship information that goes further in transparency than any mainstream brand examined in this investigation. Their canned Mayacoba beans and black beans have been independently tested for pesticide residue, heavy metals, and can lining compound migration. Those results are available directly from the company, no external databases or third-party searches required. Open a Rancho Gordo can and the texture is noticeably different from commodity canned beans, less uniform in size and color, and far more interesting to actually cook with. That's because they're sourcing older heirloom varieties selected for flavor and nutritional density rather than the visual uniformity and mechanical resilience that high-volume industrial canning demands. Available through their website, through specialty grocery retailers, and through a growing number of Whole Foods locations in major metro markets. If canned beans are a regular protein source in your household, and you want to keep that habit without the chemical exposures we documented today, this is where that grocery spend belongs. Best option number 1. Jovial Foods. Jovial packs its certified organic beans in glass jars instead of steel cans. That single material decision removes the entire category of problems this investigation documented, completely and structurally. No metal lining, no bisphenol compounds of any variety, no tin migration regardless of storage or shipping temperatures, no lead accumulating in the packing liquid across months of shelf time. Jovial sources from small certified organic farms in Italy with full traceability documentation that consumers can access directly. The brand publishes independent third-party testing results for every product in their line, not a claim printed on the jar by the company selling it. Externally produced verification that's publicly accessible. Open a Jovial jar of cannellini beans and the texture is immediately different from every canned bean described in this investigation. Firm enough to hold together through cooking, creamy at the center the way a properly prepared dried bean actually is. Because these beans haven't been sitting in a degrading metal environment with chemical compounds migrating through every surface across months of storage. The price is higher, roughly $3 to $4 per jar compared to $1 to $2 for a standard can. What that difference buys is a genuinely clean container, fully traceable sourcing, independently verified testing, and beans that behave in the kitchen the way beans are supposed to. Jovial isn't a boutique purchase for people with unlimited grocery budgets. It's the structural solution to the problem that 10 brands in this investigation either created or failed to address. One material change, glass instead of steel, and the entire list of concerns we documented disappears from the equation. 10 brands, 10 labels built to communicate trust. 4 brands that actually earned it. The can in your pantry has a label you've probably read more than once. What the label was never designed to tell you is exactly what this consumer alert investigation was built to find. Drop the brand you're checking in the comments. A lot of people watching this are standing in the same aisle trying to make the same call, and if this changed which product you reach for next time, pass it along to one person who's still buying from the list above. The label was written to protect the brand. Now you have what it left out, and that's the part that actually protects you.